My purpose in life is to leave my dent in the universe in absolutely everything I do, as well as to inspire and help others do the same. For someone to leave their dent in my life is a privilege. For me to leave my dent in someone else's life is an honor. But to inspire and help others leave their own dent in the universe is an indescribable feeling. I plan on doing this through this podcast by celebrating my guests and inspiring my listeners, all while leaving my own dent in the universe and helping others do the same. My name is Fer Andrade, and this is Denting. Before we begin today's episode, I'd just like to point out that there is a part 1 and part 2 to this episode. I had a great talk with Lacey, but this was so good that it lasted 2.5 hours. So the first part will end pretty much randomly at some point in the middle, and then part 2 will be out very soon. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Denting. Today I have a special guest, a special edition back home in San Diego right now. Lots to talk about. Very excited, which for many reasons I'll explain why right now. But Lacey, how are you?
I'm so good. How are you?
Very good. I'm very excited to do this. You are the first student from OLP that I have here on the podcast.
Represent.
Shout out OLP. But yeah, for those that don't know, OLP is an all-girls Catholic school in San Diego. I went to the all-boys Catholic school in San Diego, so it's like a sibling school. And yeah, I mean, before we dive deeper into it, do you want to introduce yourself for those that may not know you?
Yes. My name is Lacey Yahnke. I'm normally not in this position getting interviewed. I'm normally doing the interviewing and asking all the questions, so this is a little uncomfortable for me, so bear with me. But no, I am a sports journalist. I just graduated from Santa Clara University in June. I was also a Division I student athlete. I ran track and field at Santa Clara, and I also ran track and field in high school, obviously, and played a lot of sports in high school, and was over at the Saints all boys campus a lot. So that's where I met you. So that's very exciting. It's good to be back here in San Diego for a little bit, but I'm currently sort of in between roles right now, and have a lot of different things to talk about, I think, that we'll probably get into. But that's kind of where I'll start, I guess, in terms of introducing myself.
Yeah, perfect. So I do know that you did play many sports growing up. I know that you were a runner, which, like you said, that's where we met. I did 1 year of track and field, and that was it. But that's where we met. I think it's cool that track is like a big family in a way, because there's so many different events, so many different people. And I remember at the meets, it was a ridiculous amount of people, and you could like just socialize and hang out while you were waiting for your event. And I think in one of those times we met, but it's very cool because I mean, I haven't previously talked to you, but it was always like, even from there, like your hard work, like running and who you were, it was like very inspiring, and it was cool. And like I was telling you before this, like that's the reason I started the podcast, to like get to know people like this and have those conversations. So very exciting. But how did you get into running? And I know you played baseball as well, so tell me a bit about that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the kind words. So I started running when I was a freshman in high school, and before that I had played baseball for the first 17 years of my life. I actually started when I was 5, and my parents stuck me in t-ball when I was 5 years old with all the little boys, and back then it didn't matter if you were boy or girl, you just played t-ball and got out there and pretty much was just having fun as a kid. And then around the age of 8 or 9 was when maybe the girls started switching to softball, and it just never even occurred to me to switch. I just never even thought that was even really an option. And I just never really, back then you're not diving into the reasons why gender exists in sports or anything, but it just never really fazed me ever. And I just continued to play baseball until I was 17 years old. So I played until all the way through the end of my freshman year. And so I played at this local little league called Tecolote, which is a little spot in my neighborhood, and a lot of Saints graduates actually played there as well. And that's sort of where I kind of fell in love with sports. I mean, baseball was pretty much every part of my life. My dad and I were super close, and a lot of it has to do because I started playing baseball with him, and we'd go over to the field and go to practices together and stay afterwards and hit ground balls and, go to the cages before every single game. And we had this crazy bond, my dad and I, that, it's definitely like the girl dad bond for sure. But it's a little bit more than that now. I would stay up late and watch games with him and watch SportsCenter with him and go to baseball games. I was so excited to just be around baseball and be around the field. And it never even occurred to me that I was the only girl. And yeah, I remember like playing at different tournaments I played club travel ball, starting at the age of probably 15 or 16.
Okay.
Aside from this little league. So I played little league all the way through, and I was, I think I was the first girl. I don't know if I was the first girl. I was definitely one of the few that had gone all the way through and played, little league all the way through the last level. And then that was in 8th grade, and then it's time to kind of go to high school, and I was kind of trying to figure out, if I wanted to go to a public high school where I could play baseball possibly, but then I also was really interested in running, and track and field and baseball are the same season. So I wasn't, I thought I wasn't going to be able to work out, and my parents really wanted me to go to Catholic school, and OLP was just kind of always the option, and I wasn't incredibly excited to originally go to OLP. I didn't really think about, I'm definitely more of a tomboy. I get along with girls just fine now, but back then I was kind of just more anxious around girls. I just clicked a lot more with guys. I was always just around guys my whole life, so I just kind of, vibe with that a lot more, and I was never really dramatic, never really got into, really diving into more girly things, I guess. Back then it was a bigger deal, but so OLP was kind of a little bit off the radar for me, and then my parents were really pretty adamant about going to that school just because of how much they heard about just the graduates from there and, the curriculum and just having it be such a more well-rounded sort of form of education. So I chose to go there, and I kept playing baseball all the way through my freshman year and played for this travel ball team. It was called Team Combat, I remember. I don't think they're still around, but there were other, bigger little leagues like San Diego Stars and The Show, and there were other, bigger name teams, and this was sort of a smaller travel ball team. And I played there for about 2 years, and I played there was an A and a B team, and I kind of went back and forth between the A and the B team depending on who needed someone for, pinch running or center field that tournament weekend or something. And I remember just playing. There's a few guys that are now in the minor league system that I played with. A couple guys that just got drafted, some guy that's been in the A's organization for a while, and it's just crazy thinking back to playing with those guys, because it's like crazy seeing their names getting drafted on MLB Tonight. And I was always, playing. I played second base. Right. My arm wasn't necessarily strong enough to play a different side of the infield, and but what I was gonna say is playing with this travel ball team. Just before I started playing with them, I got involved I started hearing a little bit more about girls baseball, and I was always the only girl.
Yeah, and that was the USA Dream Team, right?
Yes.
All right, tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so let's see, 8th grade maybe, I started really understanding and realizing that I was the only girl all the time, and this never really was a huge issue. In hindsight, it's easy to look back and understand, okay, there was a lot of like nuanced sort of quote unquote just mistreatment or inequality that I experienced, but in the moment I didn't necessarily think too much of it. But just there were a lot of times where coaches always gave me a fair opportunity, and there were a few coaches that didn't. And now looking back, I can say, that was probably not right, but I didn't really note it at the time. But my travel ball coach for this Team Combat was one of the people that was just so inclusive, and he really pushed me to believe in myself and understand that just because I am a girl, that I deserve, just as much of a leg up on the field as any of the guys, and I didn't need to necessarily think of myself that way. And but he also kind of understood that being a girl and being the only one all the time there's a lot of pressure to that as well. So my dad and I actually started looking into some of the other girls that had played baseball throughout the country, and there were two girls. One's name is Jade Gutierrez, and the other one's name is Kelsey Whitmore. And the two of them, one lives in Temecula and another one lives in Riverside, and they had reached out through Facebook, and that was when Facebook was just beginning, I feel, or not just beginning, but at least a lot more people were starting to get on it, and they had been the only girls on their high school baseball teams as well. And so kind of came into contact with them and started learning more about this dream team, which is essentially composed of like 15 girls from across the country. It was an all-girls travel ball team, and a couple of us were based out of California, like I just said, but then a lot of people, some were from Chicago, some were from Florida, Wisconsin, Seattle. Everyone was just kind of all over, and we actually organized essentially through Facebook and started traveling to different states to play in these all-boys travel ball tournaments. And that was the first time I remember walking up to one of these tournaments and having a team full of, all girls there.
So let me just pause you there real quick. Mm-hmm. This was during high school, or when was it?
This was right before high school.
So right before high school, and you're playing all boys tournaments on an all girls team.
Yes.
All right, continue.
Yes. So, and some of these tournaments, it was kind of a weird age limit where some of us were 16, 17, and some of us were like 13, 14. So there's not many girls that play. So we always had to enter the tournaments that were for the 16, 17-year-olds. So there was sometimes there was a little bit of a weird age imbalance there, but I always thought that was kind of cool. But I always kind of tell this for context. The reason why girls baseball is even really a topic or sort of a topic of conversation is because back in 2004 or 2005, baseball got removed from the Olympics and softball, because for more or less, it's a lot of complicated reasons, but more or less baseball and softball technically are not, they're even though baseball is like the male version of softball and softball is the male version of baseball, they're not offered to both genders. Like baseball wasn't offered to both men and women.
Yeah.
And baseball is massive in other parts of the world, especially in a lot of Asian countries. And so the US was like, we need to start a team they wanted baseball back in the Olympics. It's a big moneymaker for them. So they wanted baseball back in and softball. So they created the US women's national team for women. And this was back before I could walk really. So back when it started, but around 2008 was when it kind of started to bloom a little bit and blossom. And I kind of started hearing about that through this Dream Team organization. This Dream Team organization was sort of a smaller, just a team. It wasn't a nationwide organization. It was just a team that would play at different tournaments. And we kind of started this I don't want to say started, but maybe we kind of just inspired a lot of young girls to realize that, okay, I'm not the only one out here. I don't have to be playing with just boys all the time. We would travel to different tournaments across the country, and so many young girls would come up and ask for, autographs and ask for how we got into this. Lots of parents were super interested in it. And from there, it kind of turned into this organization called Baseball for All. It's called BFA for short, and they're basically a nonprofit organization that is now a lot bigger. When I first started playing, it was a lot smaller, but just kind of recruiting girls and holding little camps and tournaments across the country to try and get more girls to join, and realize that when you turn 7 or turn 8, you don't have to switch if you don't want to, or you don't have to switch if you don't even see a need to, because and I think growing up at a time where this just started, I think it was so cool to be sort of like one of the, I don't know, quote unquote, like founding members of it, or just had become one of the first faces of it. But looking back on it now, I've kind of been involved with Baseball for All stuff for a little bit. And just looking back on the resources now, it's so cool to see. I mean, they have tournaments where they have 15, 20 teams of girls, not just one team like the Dream Team was. And this Baseball for All has like over 2,000 girls that come and join and play in their tournaments every day versus the 15 or 20. And then we're talking, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
That this national team even started. So now the national team hosted little camps, basically like developmental camps in North Carolina, and I went every single year, and it would be me and all the girls from the Dream Team, girls that had played softball in college that were still kind of dabbling with baseball a little bit, but just kind of were a little too old to hit the age group. And the Kelsey Whitmore and Jade, who I previously mentioned, they still play for the national team now.
Wow.
And they played high school baseball all the way through their senior year, and then they switched and played softball. And I always say this, these two girls were so good. Like they were, I was a good ball player, but these two girls were twice my size, and I was always, pretty skinny and scrawny, and I was a kind of a scrappy player. These two girls were like, oh my gosh. Both of them pitched, but two of them one played center field, another played shortstop. These girls were just absolute beasts, and they played one game of softball at each of the end of their high school careers just to get recruited to play college, and they got recruited instantly to like top 10 Division I softball programs. Yeah. One plays for Fullerton, and the other one played for University of Texas. Like these girls could ball, so it was just cool being on the field for them for such a short time, and it was just such an awesome community that I got involved with, and we still talk a lot, and it's just interesting to see where this program is going. And baseball was in the Olympics in 2020, and it wasn't offered for women yet, but I think it will be eventually. It just kind of needs to keep growing a little bit and needs a few more years, I think, to develop. But yeah, to answer your first question, from there I was always called upon to pinch run, and especially at some of the bigger levels. There was a point where, especially at my freshman year of high school, I was playing these games with varsity players across San Diego, and these boys were massive. This is for this travel ball team. So again, only girl travel ball team in San Diego, playing out in, Poway and Riverside, going up to Northern California, just traveling kind of all over with this team. And there got to be a point where I was standing next to some of the guys, on the line or on the field, and my mom always said, like, oh, they're 3 times your size. Like, this is kind of, you could get hurt out there. Like, yeah. It kind of got to a point where I was starting to fall out of love with it a little bit. And I don't know if I ever really fell out of love, I want to say, but I fell more in love with running.
Why was that you fell in love with running? Like, how did you find out?
Yeah, well, I always loved running the mile in PE. Everyone hated running the mile in PE. That was every kid's worst sentence was the PE coach telling everyone to run the mile PE, and I was always ecstatic to run the mile, and I would always, back then you felt like it was like your own little Olympics, running the mile and beating everyone. But I always just loved running the mile at PE, and I also loved pinch running whenever in baseball. And as silly as that sounds, you're only running 90 feet, but I always just felt kind of on fire when I was running. And I think I was thinking about this the other day, the first time that I ran for an extended period of time, longer than 10 minutes or something, I ran 6 miles one day, and I came home and I looked down at my watch, and I just kept running in my neighborhood. I was just doing like loops around my little neighborhood block, and I came home and I was like, Mom, I ran 6 miles. And she was like, what the heck, you're 10, how did you do that? And it didn't even faze me. Like, running, that's when the moment I kind of really fell in love with it, was just realizing how good I felt, and how it wasn't so much of a mental escape back then. It is now a little bit, but back then I just connected with it. I'm sure you could say the same with soccer. Like it's almost sort of like transcendental. You don't really it's not really explainable, I guess. I just fell in love with the act that it's just you against time, and you against your own mind, and And that's kind of all you need to run. You really don't even need a pair of shoes if you want.
That's kind of how I felt with track, actually, because soccer, I mean, I fell in love with the game and lost track of time and everything. But with track, what you mentioned at the end was my biggest lesson for sure, because soccer is, 11 versus 11, right?
Right.
And it's teamwork, and the only way to measure success is how many times you put the ball in the net and how many times the opponents do the same to you. And in track, it's sure there's like team points, especially in college, but there's also you individually against the opponent, but most importantly, it's you against your own time. So what I call it's you versus you, and it's so accentuated there in that type of sport, like in track, or like previous guests that I've had on the podcast, either throwers for track or swimmers as well. It's like it's you against the time, and it's, I'm not sure if at that high of a level they're even thinking about it that way, because they may be focused on their opponent as well,
right?
Which may be the case for you, but for me, especially since it wasn't that I didn't care too much, but I was doing it mostly for myself and my own fitness, like to push myself on top of soccer, because I was doing track and soccer at the same time.
Right.
And for me, it was just like, just push your time, push your fitness. It's you versus you. And that was like my biggest takeaway from that experience as well. But that's awesome with baseball. To close that part for a bit, how were your parents throughout this whole time? I know you just mentioned that your mom at one point was like, whoa, I don't want you to get hurt, for obvious reasons, right?
Yeah.
There reaches a point where it's just the physical differences are just very obvious. Even for me, baseball players are also like way bigger than me, so I completely relate to that. But how is it, you mentioned your relationship with your dad and that girl dad sort of relationship. How was that throughout your entire time? Because like you said, at 8 years old, girls go to softball, you stay the whole time. Were they supportive the entire time, or was it just like normal for you the entire way? You didn't know anything else, right?
Yeah, I didn't know anything else. But if I was to actually kind of look back on that experience, my parents were incredibly supportive the whole time. And my mom really only noticed sort of the size difference. There was that sort of like pivotal year, right, when you're in 8th grade and then all of a sudden you're in high school and then the boys are just massive, and so there was almost just like that shock value to her. But if I had said, no, I really want to keep playing, she would have 100% said absolutely. But my dad, I remember when I told him that I wanted to stop playing baseball and just focus on running, he was a little hesitant at first. He definitely was not upset, but just a little bummed out. I think not at the fact that I was stopping playing baseball. Like, it wasn't, incredibly, it wasn't that dramatic. I think though he was a little bit bummed about the fact that our relationship as it stood then was going to change, because he didn't know that much about running. Running wasn't something that he could do with me, and running sort of became my own passion that I really did forge myself in terms of like the training, and he was there through that and helping me, look for colleges and talk to coaches, and he was with me throughout the whole recruiting process. But with baseball, it was something that I would ask him, can we stay after practice and play catch for 30 minutes? Can we stay after and hit 50 ground balls at the end of this practice? Can we go to the cage before? It was the time that we had spent together, I think, that I think he just realized that was sort of a chapter that he was closing and I was closing too, and that sort of element I think he was bummed to be missing. And he dove right into the running world, and as little as he did know about it, he tried his best to learn, and that aspect was awesome from him too. But there was definitely a hesitation, I think, and I think he was just more so bummed out. I also just think he loved the fact that I was the only girl out there. He got to bond with so many of my teammates' dads, and we were all friends, and the whole friend group lived in the Tecolote is like a small little neighborhood almost, and so it was sort of like the end of an era more so than it was the end of a career per se. But I last year, every year for Thanksgiving when I came home from school, pretty much I would ask my dad if we can go hit grounders, and his, he'll never admit it, but his arm is kind of given out, and he can't really play catch that much anymore. But I always wanted to go to the cages still afterwards. I still would totally do that. I play catch pretty often still. So I don't know. I think it's more so the relationship between us that just grew in a new way, but it definitely changed when I decided to stop.
Yeah, and I mean that's baseball. That is track and running mostly, because there's also the cross country aspect.
Yeah.
When did writing start? Was that in high school or was that in college?
Writing was all college.
All right, so going through high school, how did you decide on Santa Clara?
Yeah, so I actually committed to Santa Clara pretty early on. I decided to commit there right after my official visit.
Okay.
I took a couple official visits to some other schools, some other bigger schools, but immediately I decided on Santa Clara because the team, the men's and women's team, was very close. I took an unofficial visit to San Diego State, and they didn't have a men's team. And surprisingly enough, now that I say that I grew up pretty much all around boys, I really did want, and I think a lot of that had to do with OLP, and I think a lot of that had to do with the women's national developmental team. Having that community of girls, I really wanted a strong sense of family within a girls running program, but I also wanted that male team connection too. I wanted that to be sort of a bigger family, and having gone to OLP and Saints, I mean, it is very separated, so I wanted that. So a lot of schools that I went to didn't necessarily offer a men's program. So Santa Clara offered that, and then the size of the school, I just loved the size of the campus. I loved the campus. It's a beautiful campus, but I also just loved the size and how small and tight-knit. I mean, I remember walking around with my, former teammates, but then I was, on my recruiting visit, as you know, so I was all intimidated, and I just remember walking around with them, and they were, seeing people that they knew, almost literally like recognizing everyone. It's such a small school that it has that sort of high school feel in just a much bigger way. And you really felt like a sense of belonging there. And so aside from even the running program, just the team itself was really close. So that's what what gravitated me to go there first and foremost. But other than that, the campus sold me right away as well. Yeah. And the coaches were also really close with the teammates too. And I just noticed that even just riding along in the car and playing music and the coach singing, and we were all just kind of one big family, which was a big component of why I chose to go there.
And I'm asking that actually because I've been to Santa Clara twice now. The first time was with my academy team back in high school, and the second time was this past fall, actually, like a few weeks ago, because we played against Santa Clara, and it was a quick reminder for me that I love that campus so much. Like everything about it. It's how small it is, how nice it is, everything. I love it so much, and I always say, mostly in a more of a joke than actually like saying it, but if I didn't care about soccer, like if soccer weren't in the picture, I would have loved to have gone to Santa Clara. Right. Because the school just itself is like you said, it's smaller. I just love the campus itself. Looking back at it now, I'm very glad I went to Berkeley because it just changed my entire life as I knew it. I was in a bubble, like I had mentioned a bit ago off podcast, but like being in campus that's this big and everything, it's helped me out a lot. But I just wanted to ask because Santa Clara is like, in a way, it's like similar to the bubble that we were in before. Yeah, exactly. But it's beautiful.
Yeah, I always think that too. I think you've probably heard this going through the recruiting process too. But it's like, if the sport didn't exist, if you got injured, would you still want to go to the school? And my answer to that is definitely yes. But I agree. I think looking back on it, going to a place like Berkeley and having so many perspectives and human voices and just different people from different cultures in the same room, I think, at a bigger university is something that Santa Clara didn't offer as much. And I think if track wasn't an option or something, it's funny, you always look at the other person's perspective, grass is always greener kind of thing, but I would have loved to even go to a school like that where you are offered so much different perspective too. So it's just interesting always talking to athletes, because it's like, they always choose to go to the school they chose for the sport, but there's always other options too.
Yeah, 100%. And well, you get to Santa Clara, and you had a lot of improvements with your times throughout the years. I have some of your times down from freshman year to sophomore year. You dropped what was it, almost 2 entire minutes in your 6K, which is crazy. You kept it improving as well in the 800 by you dropped a total of 7 seconds from freshman to junior year. How was that, and how was that experience, and how did you slowly start getting into journalism, and how was that?
Yeah, it's funny that you actually mentioned that. So my running career was not, if I was looking at coming into Santa Clara right when I started as a freshman, I would not have pictured my sort of next 4 years to go the way they did. So my freshman year, I came in and there was just so much change, and I think with female athletes specifically, every athlete definitely goes through so much change, and there's just a lot of sort of up in the air. You go from, being oftentimes the best on your high school team, and then you go to a college team, Division I team, where you're just another, member of the team, often riding the bench or, not making the travel team for different events. So that definitely took a toll on me. But, and I think for female athletes too, in that time frame, your body changes, you're going through so much different changes hormonally and emotionally and mentally and physically. And there's just a lot that I think happened my freshman year that, I didn't have a good freshman year in terms of my times for my standards of myself. I mean, in my senior year and junior year of high school at OLP, I ran really well and qualified for CIF both years and went to the finals both years and got to state and cross country and things like that. So I had a lot of high standards for myself, and I think my freshman year was just a big wake-up call in terms of, okay, this is what it really means to train. This is what it means to run 45 miles a week. At OLP, I didn't necessarily have a solid training plan. I was running on a lot of natural talent, and when I got to college, it was immediately humbled me in terms of, okay, you're going to have to run X amount of miles a week, you're going to have to log them all, you're going to have to go to weights 3 times a week, you're going to have to double, which is running twice in one day, you're going to have to, it was a strict schedule. And freshman year, that really just it didn't rattle me, but I wouldn't say rattled, but it definitely changed the way I thought about my running career. And then sophomore year, I came in with, kind of guns a-blazing, just incredibly motivated, took that whole summer to train and really kind of work my, am I allowed to say ass?
You can say whatever you want on this podcast.
Work my ass off and train for the start of sophomore year cross country, and that season went really, really well for me. And going into winter indoor track, I actually had pretty bad plantar fasciitis, which for people that don't know is one of the most nagging, awful injuries in running. It's basically just a kind of a tear, micro tears in the arch of your foot. And so during my sophomore year, I was coming around the final turn of an 800, and I came up for the final 150, and I came up on my kick and came up on my toes to start sprinting and ruptured the right arch of my foot, which I had the worst case of plantar fasciitis in. And I ended up, I think I tore it around the 80 meter mark.
Damn.
And I just had so much adrenaline that I just kind of kept finishing it. But I crossed the line, and I was kind of keeled over, and I took one step, and I just couldn't even, I just kind of collapsed on the ground because my arch was kind of gone essentially, or just in half. And I had to basically get that looked at, and was in a boot for 8 weeks, and my whole season was over sophomore year. And then junior year, the summer before my junior year, I actually traveled and spent 8 weeks in Bolivia.
Yes.
Which we can go over later, but that was a whole experience because I was living in Bolivia for 8 weeks, and it was at 10,000 feet of elevation, and the food was different, the culture was different. I was the only girl there, which is we'll get into that later probably, but and I had a parasite for the last 3 weeks. It was just a crazy experience, but my training there wasn't as rock solid as I wanted it to be, but it was enough. So cross country that fall wasn't great, but I kind of got back on track in junior year. That was when I really saw a ton of improvement in terms of my time, and I was just always, my dad had instilled this in me, but I was always kind of like the first person to get there, last person to leave at practice. And showing up, maybe not always in like the greatest attitude, but just showing up with a lot of drive and showing up, first every day trying to, either put people in good mood or trying to rally the troops sort of, and then kind of being the last person to leave, last person to do core, take that extra time to do flexibility work or sit down with the weight coach. I always loved weightlifting. Sit down with the weight coach and sort of do that extra stuff. And so that was really kind of just crushing junior year when COVID hit, because that we had run 2 meets. So I had already seen, a big difference in jump in my times, and those times were similar to sort of what I was running in high school. And so then I was just really feeling a lot of momentum and really feeling like I could knock off a large chunk and really improve and consistently make the travel team for that whole junior and definitely for senior year. And then COVID happened, so the whole season was canceled and put on pause for a while, and then training was just an absolute mess. But I did train all the way through my junior year, May, just on my own back in San Diego. Everyone came home for that, and
so that's May 2020.
May 2020, and actually, and this is kind of a full circle moment with my dad earlier, because for the longest time, and that was my first year as a captain of the team, and so for the longest time, my coach was kind of like, okay, we need to keep rallying people, we need to have people keep training, and so a lot of our team was actually really well. We actually ran, my last meet was a meet at Cal.
The Cal opener, right?
Yeah. And I had lost, I got out-edged by this girl. It was a really fun race, and I just got out-edged by this girl at the very end, and it was the first time that it wasn't exactly the time that I was totally wanting to run. I definitely felt like I had more in the tank, and I could have run a lot faster as that season had gone on. I was just feeling really strong, and that was definitely the fittest I'd ever been. But it was just a fun race because it kind of reminded me it kind of made me fall back in love with it a little bit. I think you go through waves a little bit in terms of your athletic career and figuring out if this is really what you want to do. And after traveling and spending that whole summer abroad, I was kind of like, having all these perspective shifts and everything. And I just realized, okay, like running, this is definitely where I want to be. This is the space that I want to be, just very athletically driven at that point. And when COVID happened, I just kind of kept that momentum going. And my coach was like, we need to keep people motivated. So we did, the Zoom core sessions and trying to get people to keep logging their miles and all that. And some people just kind of got injured really without having the support of the training staff and all that, having to train from home, and other people lost motivation, or it was, terrible time for everyone at that point. So, but I just kept kind of moving through it. And I told my dad, I said, the most miles I had ever run in terms of a training session was 16. And that was for one of the long runs on one Sunday during the years. And I told my dad, I really want to run 17. And my dad, he's no runner by any means, and he didn't know as much about running or just the training cycle. He's like, okay, let's do it. And so for 2 months, essentially, I kind of stuck to my same training plan that our coach gave. Our coach would email us the same workouts every week. So you're showing up to. I think I went to the USD turf field a couple times. I went to Claremont track, snuck in, like hopping over fences to do these workouts in COVID with no meets to really do. So I think this was like the time where I was like the most driven. No one's watching you. There's no clock. There's no time that's going to capture a certain time. I think I ran like a few 800 meter time trials. I'd run 220 once and 219 another time. So I was seeing that improvement, but nothing was official, nothing, that can come up on a stat sheet or anything like that.
That's crazy because, the Cal opener was 223 and you're mentioning 219.
Yeah.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah, it made, that made me feel good, but I was getting a lot of enjoyment actually with just trying to see if I could push this, for whatever reason, 17-mile run. And it didn't really necessarily mean anything significantly, a lot of people can go out and do that, and on my team, a lot of people, we had some really friggin' badass girls on my team that could run, and I was more middle distance, so running longer was more daunting for me. And so I always remember it was the last day of the training cycle in May, and my dad got on his bike and we ran 17 miles. We ran all the way from my house out to Sunset Cliffs, did the loop around Sunset Cliffs, came back, ran down Mission Bay and finished at the loop at my house. And
wow.
The last mile, I think I ran in 5:53. I was moving the last, cause I was just so motivated by this weird, kind of arbitrary goal. But my dad was on the bike in front of me, and I remember finishing and just kind of crying. Cause I was like, oh my gosh, I was just so proud of that training block, because I didn't have a time to really go off of it. I didn't really have I didn't have a stat line or a personal best to really show for it. I just kind of had my own mental drive and my own sort of perspective to really go with it. And it left me feeling super confident. And I remember coming back saying okay, well, when COVID subsides and we get back to training full time, that's the kind of energy and mentality that I want to bring into next year. And then, in the fall, the season cross country didn't happen. And then in the spring, it still didn't really happen. And we didn't have much of anything going on in the winter time. So that's, early January and February of this past year. And then we had one meet in April at Westmont College, I think. Okay. With a couple different other Division I schools, and it was just at that point it was I was on my way out as a senior, and at that point I don't know if you were in a bubble as well, athletic bubble.
So spring of this year. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we did have a season. Pac-12 was on, but it was pretty much a bubble. Yeah. Our team was our bubble.
Right. Right.
At some points, it was 5 of us living together. At some points, we literally only saw each other, which is crazy to think of now, because the amount of things that changed from January of 2021 to May of 2021 is insane. Yeah. We went from literally our plans on Friday nights, Saturday nights was all right, let's order food and watch a movie, to having a formal at the end of the season and being completely fine with it. Right. And it's crazy to see how much changed and how crazy that was. But did you guys, so I'm just realizing this because your 4th season didn't come up on the website, and I just realized that your conference wasn't on, right? Yeah,
we had some meets that were just kind of put together last minute and kind of organized, but we didn't have, so at the end there, I was in that bubble for 3 months, and we had a cross country season. I only ran one meet a year for cross country because I was more middle distance focused. So we kind of used middle distance people kind of used that as a little bit of a workout kind of, and it was our home meet. It was called Bronco Invitational, and so it was a Santa Clara hosted meet. So everyone kind of ran it as support for sort of the school. But that cross country season we only had one conference race, and I think it was in March, and it was sort of just a hodgepodge of who had been, at that point, our Santa Clara was one of the strictest counties in terms of letting people back on campus and just the county in general. But Santa Clara University, we had so many protocols that we had to follow through, and that was at the beginning of getting the testing and doing the testing 3 times a week and being in the bubble. And I lived in a house with 8 of us total. Okay. So we were just inside all the time as well. And as a senior, 100%, I always say this, if I had been a junior, things would have been completely different. I think my perspective I would have just had a different perspective on this. But as a senior, I was just my best friend in on the team, her name's Sarah King. Her and I were the seniors in the house, and a lot of the seniors had chosen to opt out earlier from the year, and just at that point there was still so much up in the air whether or not we were going to have a season, and you kind of had to commit to the bubble before the season even started. There was just a lot up in the air, and at that point I just mentally was so drained and was just physically and mentally so exhausted that the thought of being in the bubble till the end of my senior year was incredibly scary. And we only had about 6 weeks of senior year left. So I think our team had 3 or 4 other meets. But all the seniors pretty much kind of opted out, myself included. And we just kind of finished out the year. It was kind of just now that I'm thinking about it, it was a very anticlimactic end to the year, just because I felt like I didn't have the ending that I wanted. I didn't come out with a personal best that I could kind of hang a star on, just like, some other teams. My personal best is the same as, having a championship under your belt, or and with, like we said earlier, it's just kind of you versus the clock. And the clock, I felt like the clock kind of beat me, because I didn't have the race. I didn't necessarily have the opportunities I wish I could have had to kind of really prove myself in that way. So that's sort of why I kind of rely on that junior year and training cycle and that, 17-mile run, as weird as it sounds, because that just proved so much more to me. I realized that it didn't need to be about this time that I had always been searching for. I had put 213 on my door when I was in 7th grade, above my door, and every time I left the house I would slap it, because I was like, oh, that's what I want to, that's the time I want to run. And I definitely feel like I could have achieved that. And I just, obviously you can't control things, and you can't control a pandemic happening in the middle of your college career, but yeah, looking back on it, I'm so grateful to have had that opportunity and to have been a part of a Division I team and that kind of culture. It made me who I was, and it gave me my friends and my family and my work ethic, and it was such a pivotal part for me. But the end was just sad, because it didn't really end the way I wish it did.
Yeah.
Because all of senior year was essentially in that bubble. And so much of my best friends on the team had all opted out, and we were all just kind of trying to figure out what we wanted to do and how we wanted to best serve the team while also best serving ourselves. And I think ultimately the pandemic didn't serve up the best opportunity for that. But still, the athletic department did an awesome job with making the bubble even happen, regardless of competition and not. So I think that part of it was just, it was awesome to be a part of. But I know that you know what I mean in terms of when you're thinking about the bubble, because it was something else. A lot.
Yeah, and it's actually very interesting to me, because your whole experience, the way you described it, freshman year especially, I was very rattled as well, and I had it was a learning experience, right, for sure. It's my 3 years at Cal, or 2.5 right now, have been a learning experience. That's just how it's been, and I'm extremely thankful for it, because if it had gone the same way as it did in high school, I just wouldn't have grown.
Right.
But since I relate so much to it, I feel like your 17-mile run was just a big moment for you as an athlete, even though it wasn't at Santa Clara, even though the time wasn't recorded, because you just showed that you're capable of it, You proved it to yourself, and it's that you versus you thing again, because even if you say the clock did beat you at times, it was you versus you, and you realized that, that's enough. Right. I mean, maybe it'd be nice to have a certain time, or to win a certain meet, or whatever it may be, but you proved to yourself, and that's enough. There's a great story of 2 authors, Kurt Vonnegut and Joe Heller. Well, it's actually a poem. Vonnegut wrote it for Heller. It's called Joe Heller. But the 2 authors were basically at a billionaire's party, and the billionaire was just hosting this event, and the 2 authors were off to the side, not really fitting in, and Vonnegut wants to mess with Heller, and he says, hey, Joe, how does it make you feel that our host for tonight's party made more money yesterday alone than your best novel ever will? And he replied by saying, I have something he never will. And he said, what in the hell can that be? And he replied, enough. And I think that's like very special, and honestly the story kind of pisses me off at times because I'm a very ambitious person, so it's like, no, like, go for more. But at the same time, I think it's those moments when you're like, I did it, and I don't have to prove it to anyone else, and I don't have to have a recorded time, and I don't have to have a medal to know that I did it, and that's enough. And I think that it's a great way to view it, and I'm glad you were able to do that run even if everything else didn't work out.
Yeah, wow, that story just gave me chills. I love that. Yeah, that is exactly what I'm talking about. I realized so much in that year, aside from running and just understanding that there's just so much that exists beyond being an athlete, and I think I realized that the magnitude of that moment, obviously everything, the COVID taught people a lot of things, but I think I realized that in that moment, and to realize that, my career might not look the way I wanted it to at the beginning, but looking back on it, it completely made me who I was. It turned me into a leader. It turned me into a deep thinker. It turned me into a writer. It turned me into just, when I was injured, my sophomore year was when I joined the newspaper, and I think if I had been full-time training, I wouldn't have been able to expand so much of my time limit and put so much time into writing. So I think the world has a weird way of kind of coming full circle and giving things back when you need it, and thinking back on this experience definitely did just that.
I'll go off of a little other story to go off of that. There's a book called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. I mentioned that guy's name way too much on this podcast. He is by far my favorite author. And that book basically goes on to show you, it's a very stoic way of saying that everything happens for a reason. It's not a positive book or like optimist or anything. That's not what it's about. It's just to show you that you're not in control of what happens to you. You're in control of how you respond. And for example, you went through that injury, you got into writing. I tore my meniscus earlier this year. I created this podcast, and the obstacle does become the way. And I'd like to just like talk a bit more about that. Like how was it that you got into journalism? What was it that made it interesting for you? Like, how was that process? Because for me, I've always been into communications. So ever since I got social media on my phone, like I wasn't posting like I am today, but everyone would like mess with me because I would post way too much.
Right.
Like, that's just who I was, and I would record everything. Like that's just who I was. I would record and post everything, and my friends would always give me shit for it. But later I started developing like writing in high school, and I'm like, whoa, I really like to write. And I joined the Augustinian, and I was the sports writer at the Augustinian by my senior year, and it was so much fun. Yeah, but that's how I was like, I'll continue writing and all those sorts of things. And now I have a blog. It's like the Calman Soccer blog, and I do it. But that's how I found out. How do you do that until your until your college years, and then form a major around that?
Yeah, good question. I think the obstacle was the way for most of my freshman year in terms of my academics.
Okay.
I came into Santa Clara as a public health major because I wanted to be an athletic trainer. And for some reason, I went to a lot of physical therapy my senior year of high school. I dealt with a lot of injury too for running, and so I thought, I'm kind of interested in this. I'll declare this as my major, and then I took, it was literally called, I think it was like chemistry 1, oh no, it was chemistry 11, basically just intro chem.
Yeah.
And I quickly realized that was not the class or the curriculum for me. I must have put in 17 hours of studying to get a passing grade of a C-. I was terrible at chemistry. I can laugh at myself here because it was most of my friends give me shit for it too. I was just really not good at chemistry, but that was the only way forward with public health. And so my freshman year, right after that first quarter, I was like, okay, I need to get the hell out of here. The business school, they accept transfers. Maybe I could, do some type of, sports management someday. Or I knew I wanted to focus on sports so badly, because they're ingrained in my soul. I feel like they're such a lifeline for me, and it's just kind of all I knew. So I was like, okay, I definitely want to stay in sports, maybe sports management, maybe I could sports psychology. Psychology's kind of cool, law school, maybe sports agent. I don't know. Like, I was kind of throwing around all these ideas, and I just kind of went back to the drawing board, and I took a class called Writing for Publication, and it was with my favorite professor. His name's Mike Malone. He's a big mentor of mine. He basically, we had to write a memoir, and I was one of the assignments, and sort of it was writing for publication. It was sort of essentially like creative nonfiction too. And I wrote this memoir about baseball, and how baseball has sort of just my perspective on it through my eyes. And I turned it in for the grade, and he called me, after class one day, and it was like, you should really think about submitting this to the newspaper, the college newspaper. We always need people to write. You should really think about it. And so I was like, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. And I submitted this to the newspaper as part of my sort of application, and I knew enough about baseball and football to sort of get by, but my sophomore year was, like I said, right when I got injured, and that was sort of around the time when I really pursued it and got hired there. And there was an open position in the sports writing department. It's just a staff writer, and I just fell in love with it right away. I didn't really realize how good at writing I was until then. So anyway, I have a twin sister. Her name's Ivy. She went to OLP too, and she went to Cal Poly and studied journalism too. And just the nature of twins, I think at the eighth grade, high school level, when you're just kind of trying to form your own identity and figure your own shit out, and figure out what you want to do. And she was an athlete too. She played volleyball at OLP, and then she played a little bit of club volleyball at Cal Poly. But she had declared journalism, and so I was like, oh, I just want to do the opposite of that. I'll do science stuff. And then I kind of realized, okay, well, I'm really good at this writing thing, but I didn't really want to step on her toes and claim journalism. So I didn't really declare my major for a little while. I just kind of stuck with the sports writing aspect, but it was still so woven in sports that I really just found my way. And obviously it's silly now. She loves the fact that I'm a writer too, but she's kind of more focused on PR/movie. She loves film writing and stuff, more the arts stuff. Not as interested in sports. So
there's your difference.
Yeah. So which is really cool too. But yeah. So my sophomore year, at the end of the year, I just realized, okay, this is 100% what I want to do. I just found my groove in it. I'm an incredibly curious person. I relate a lot to what you're doing right now, and it's inspiring and B, very relatable. And yeah, I think we would get along super well. Because
I was about to say, yeah, that is 100% me.
I'm just I'm driven by storylines. I'm driven by what people add. I love to make and learn about what make people tick, and I love to double click into issues, and yes. I'm just fascinated by people.
Yes.
And that side of journalism just captured me. And even though I was a lot of times when I first started out, the editor-in-chief was just assigning game stories, going to cover a game, or writing a game recap or a game preview, or interviewing athletes, kind of doing the more conventional standard, or writing about a national story aligned in sports. And a lot of that stuff taught me, it was the foundation of journalism for me, learning how to pitch stories and cover teams and draft interviews and all that. But I was still I was driven by a lot more within just sports. And like I said, being injured, I think I just kind of dove into the journalism world and kind of created, I kind of joke, you spend 20 hours of your week as a collegiate athlete practicing, and during that time I couldn't go to practice, so I was in the pool. I was actually, oh my gosh, I got really into swimming because I couldn't run. So I swam a lot during practice time, but then I would also, because I couldn't be physically there at practice, I would spend a lot of that time writing. And I can't remember necessarily what the original moment must have been, but I remember sitting down and thinking back to the baseball days and just thinking back to sort of this overall idea of women's sports and women's coverage. And I realized, okay, well, a lot of the stories that I've written are about men and about male sports and about issues, obviously, that have to do with, you know, wins and losses and game stories and that kind of story, those kinds of storylines. But I sort of slowly started realizing the bigger picture to, especially surrounding COVID and surrounding a lot of the Black Lives Matter movement, and just kind of realizing how much gravity there is to the world. And once COVID happened and I started realizing just there's so much more to being an athlete and so much more to this platform that I'm given, I kind of realized, okay, I actually really kind of want to start my own column. And I went to the sports editor, or the editor at the time, the manager of the newspaper, and I said to both of them, I said, I really want to start this column, and I want it to kind of focus on more marginalized topics in sports, gender issues, gender equality, racial justice, sort of issues that go beyond just the average game story. And they were super supportive, and they said, absolutely, go for it. So I started this weekly column, and I called it Sideline Chatter. And looking back on it, it's just a funny title, because there's just some of these stories were a lot bigger than I was, and some of the times I felt a little uncomfortable writing them. But that's sort of how I really just dove into it. I just kind of took a risk, and it was, that professor, Mike Malone, who told me, you should really go for this. And yeah, that's sort of how I segued into it. Not a pretty start to the journalism career, but definitely one that was very needed at the time.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Make sure to subscribe to my podcast and follow me on my personal social media accounts for more, all at Fer Andraez. All links are in the description. If this episode inspired you in any way, please help me out by sharing it with a friend to help them leave their dent in the universe as well. That's it for today. I'll see you all next time.